While cleaning my husband's car, I accidentally found his second phone. There were 3,000 messages, 12 years of texts with another woman. I silently called my lawyer. When my husband found out, "Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also, let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I used to believe that a good marriage was something you built the way you built a house, brick by brick, year by year, with your own hands and your own sweat. Daniel and I had been together for 16 years, married for 14. We lived in a 4-bedroom colonial in Naperville, Illinois, the kind of house with a wraparound porch and a mailbox painted the same shade of cream as the shutters. We had 2 kids, Mia, who was 12, and Owen, who was 9. I was a high school English teacher. Daniel ran a mid-sized logistics company he had inherited from his father. On paper, we looked exactly like what we were supposed to look like. And for a long time, that was enough for me. I was the woman who organized the neighborhood block party, who coached Mia's soccer team on weekends, who made Daniel's mother feel welcome every Thanksgiving, even though she had never once thanked me for it. I was busy in the way that American mothers are busy, relentlessly, invisibly, without applause. I told myself that was love. I told myself that was partnership. But somewhere around year 11, something in Daniel shifted, not dramatically. That's the thing nobody tells you. Betrayal doesn't arrive like a thunderstorm. It comes the way fog does, slowly, quietly, until you can't see your hand in front of your face. He started working late, once a week, then twice. Then late became a loose word that could mean 8 in the evening or 11. He began taking his phone to the bathroom. He laughed differently at his screen. A private laugh, a small and careful one, like a man trying not to be overheard. He started going to the gym at 6 in the morning, which wouldn't have been strange, except that for 9 years, he had called himself constitutionally opposed to early mornings. He bought new cologne without telling me. He lost 11 pounds. I noticed all of it. And I told myself stories to explain all of it. Work stress, a new client, a phase. Men go through phases. I was good at telling myself stories. 14 years of practice. The first real crack appeared on a Tuesday in March. I had come home early, a teacher in service day, and found Daniel in the kitchen, laughing into his phone. When he heard me come through the door, the laugh stopped, as though someone had flipped a switch. He looked at me with an expression I can only describe now as the face a person makes when they realize they've been caught, and then he rearranged it, in less than a second, into something normal, something husbandly. "Hey," he said, "didn't hear you come in." He put the phone face down on the counter. I said nothing. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of the bathtub, and breathed. That night I lay awake beside him and thought, am I seeing things that aren't there? Or am I finally seeing what has always been there? I chose to believe the former. For 3 more months, I chose it deliberately, the way you choose to not look at something painful, by looking just slightly to the left of it. Then came the Saturday in June that changed everything. Daniel had taken the kids to his parents' place for the weekend. He'd left his car in the driveway and he'd asked me, casually, on his way out, keys in hand, if I could clean it out. He'd been meaning to take it to the detailer, he said. Just clear out the trash, he said, the kind of request that sounds so ordinary it leaves no room for hesitation. So I did it. I took a garbage bag and his car keys, and I went out to the driveway on a Saturday morning in June. I pulled out coffee cups and parking receipts and Owen's forgotten jacket and a gas station receipt from a town I had never heard of, a town 40 minutes from Naperville. And then, under the front passenger seat, tucked behind the seat rail in a thin leather case I had never seen before, my hand found something. A phone. Not his regular phone. He had that with him. This was older, smaller, a model I didn't recognize. A prepaid phone. And when I pressed the button, the screen lit up, and it was not locked. 3,214 messages. A contact saved simply as R. The earliest message was dated 12 years ago. My hands did not shake. That surprised me later, that my hands stayed completely still. I stood in the driveway in the June sunlight, and I scrolled and I read, and I understood with a clarity that felt almost surgical that my entire marriage had been built on a floor that did not exist. I put the phone back exactly where I found it. I went inside. I sat at the kitchen table, and I made a call. Not to Daniel, not to my mother, not to my sister. I called a lawyer. The lawyer I called was named Patricia Hale. I had never needed a divorce attorney before, and I found her the way people find things in moments of quiet desperation. Through a Google search conducted with shaking composure at my own kitchen table, children away, husband away, house completely silent. Her office was on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Chicago, and when I called that Saturday, I expected a voicemail. Instead, she picked up. She had a voice like a woman who had heard every version of every story and had stopped being surprised by any of them. I liked her immediately. I told her what I had found. I told her quickly and without crying, which impressed even me. She asked me several questions in a calm, methodical way. How long had we been married? Were there assets? Was there a mortgage? Were there children? Was there a prenuptial agreement? And I answered each one. There was no prenuptial agreement. I had never asked for one. I had been 28 years old and in love, and prenuptial agreements were for people who expected to fail. When I hung up, I sat for a long time without moving. I tried to calculate the losses, not the emotional ones. I couldn't go there yet, couldn't afford to, not that day, but the practical ones. 14 years, 2 children, a mortgage we had refinanced together 3 years ago, a joint savings account with $134,000 that I had contributed to just as much as he had, a retirement account in both our names, his company, which had grown significantly in the years we'd been married, years during which I had entertained his clients, managed our household, raised our children, and subsidized his professional life with my emotional labor in ways that were never counted and never named. What had I given? Everything. What had I known about? Half. Less than half. And then there was the other question, the one I couldn't stop circling. Who was R? 12 years. 12 years of 3,000 messages. 12 years of a parallel life running alongside mine like a shadow version of everything I thought was real. Mia had been born during those 12 years. Owen had been born. We had bought this house. We had buried Daniel's father. We had taken Mia to the emergency room when she broke her arm in 5th grade, and Daniel had held my hand in the waiting room and told me everything was going to be fine. And the whole time, there had been R. I gave myself 48 hours to feel it. That was the deal I made with myself. 2 days. 2 days to sit on the bathroom floor and cry until I was empty. 2 days to be the woman in the movie who falls apart. And then I was done. Because here is what I understood on the morning of the 3rd day, when I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked at myself with red eyes and a very clear head. Panic was a luxury I could not afford. I was a woman with 2 children, a mortgage, and a husband who had been conducting a secret relationship for 12 years. The moment I let emotion lead, I would lose. I had read enough history, taught enough literature, watched enough of my own mother's mistakes to know exactly how that story ended. So I made a plan. Step 1. I said nothing to Daniel. Nothing. He came home Sunday evening from his parents' place with the kids, and I kissed him on the cheek and asked if they'd had a good time, and I meant none of it, and he suspected nothing. Step 2. I went back to Patricia Hale's office on Monday morning and retained her formally. She gave me a list of things to do and things emphatically not to do. Do not confront him. Do not move money. Do not tell mutual friends. Do not touch the second phone again. Step 3. I began quietly making copies. 14 years of shared financial documents, tax returns, bank statements, the mortgage papers. Everything I could access digitally, I photographed and emailed to a new account he didn't know existed, an account I created on my phone, on a network he wasn't connected to, at the public library on Benton Avenue. Step 4. I hired a private investigator. His name was Marcus Webb, and Patricia recommended him. He was quiet and professional, and he charged $175 an hour, and I paid for him with money from my personal checking account, the one with my teacher's salary direct deposits, the account that had always been technically mine alone, a small independence I had maintained out of old habit and had never thought to be grateful for until now. Marcus Webb asked me one question at our first meeting. Do you want confirmation or do you want documentation? I said, both. He nodded like he respected the answer. That night, I cooked dinner and helped Owen with his math homework and told Mia she needed to redo the introduction of her history essay. And Daniel sat across from me at our dinner table and talked about a contract he was trying to close. And I listened and nodded and refilled his water glass. And underneath the surface of every ordinary moment, I was building something, quietly, carefully, brick by brick. The way I had always believed a good marriage was built, except this time I was building my exit. 3 weeks after I found the phone, Marcus Webb sent me a folder. I was sitting in my car in the school parking lot at 7:14 in the morning, before first period, before the students arrived, before I had to be anyone's teacher or anyone's wife. The email came through on my phone with a simple subject line, Documentation, Phase 1. I opened it right there in the driver's seat, with the engine still running and the air conditioning blowing cold against my face. Inside were photographs, timestamps, receipts, a log of observed meetings. Her name was Rachel Fortin. She was 39 years old. She worked as a commercial interior designer with a studio in Lincoln Park, Chicago. She was tall, with dark hair, and she drove a silver BMW that Daniel had apparently helped her lease, a detail Marcus had found by cross-referencing a financing record with Daniel's business account. There was a restaurant in River North where they met on the second Tuesday of every month, without exception, for at least 4 years. Marcus had photographs of them at a table by the window. Daniel was leaning toward her with the ease of a man who believed he was invisible. He was not invisible. There was more. Much more. Marcus had traced a subsidiary account connected to Daniel's company, a shell of sorts, not illegal on its face, but structured in a way that allowed funds to flow out without appearing on the household statements I had access to. An accountant Patricia had referred me to estimated conservatively that approximately $340,000 had moved through that account over 6 years in ways that could not be explained by ordinary business expenses, dinners, hotel reservations, a weekend in Montreal, a week in Tuscany that Daniel had told me was a client retreat. I sat in that parking lot for 11 minutes. Then I went inside and taught 3 sections of 11th grade English, and I did not miss a single beat. That week, something changed in the house. I couldn't point to one moment. It was more like a barometric shift, the kind animals feel before a storm. Daniel became watchful, not paranoid, not yet, but attentive in a new way. He started coming home at more consistent hours. He made a visible effort to be present at dinner. He asked about my day with a specificity he hadn't used in years. I believe he sensed something without knowing what. Perhaps it was the absence of the small complaints I usually made, the low-grade friction of any long marriage. Perhaps it was the way I had become, without meaning to, very still. A stillness that read, to someone paying attention, as unusual. He said one evening while we were loading the dishwasher, "You okay? You seem quiet." "Long week," I said, and handed him a plate. He accepted that. He wanted to accept that. Meanwhile, I filed the first official paperwork. Patricia had advised me that Illinois law required certain conditions for discovery, and we had met all of them. We filed a formal petition, not yet served. Patricia counseled me to wait until our financial discovery was more complete, but filed and docketed and real. My name on a legal document asking a court to dissolve my marriage. The first time I saw it, I had to read it twice. Not because I doubted it, because seeing the words in that context, in a courthouse font on official paper, made something in my chest go very quiet. This was the point of no return. I knew that. Once served, there was no version of this that ended with Daniel and me sitting across from each other and finding our way back. But had there ever been? Had there been a version of my marriage that was real enough to return to? No. The phone under the seat had answered that question. I signed what needed to be signed. The following Tuesday, Marcus sent me a brief text. Subject met R this afternoon. 2 hours. Lincoln Park Studio. I have it. Attached was a photograph taken from across the street. Daniel going in, Daniel coming out. Timestamp visible, his face entirely clear. I forwarded it to Patricia. She responded 12 minutes later. Good. We're ready when you are. And I thought about Rachel Fortin in her Lincoln Park studio, arranging furniture and light and the beautiful surfaces of other people's homes. And I thought about the 12 years she had spent inside my marriage without my knowledge, and I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not rage, not grief, certainty. I texted Patricia back 3 words, serve him Friday. Friday came with the particular cruelty of ordinary mornings. The sun was out. Owen had lost one of his sneakers. Mia wanted to know if she could go to her friend Jess's house after school. I said yes. I braided Mia's hair. I found Owen's sneaker behind the couch. I made coffee. I watched Daniel drink it at the kitchen island while he scrolled through his phone, and I thought, this is the last ordinary morning. At 9:47 a.m., while Daniel was in his office on the 42nd floor of the building downtown where he had worked since his father's death, a process server walked up to his assistant and handed him an envelope. Patricia texted me at 9:53, done. I was at school, between second and third period, standing in the hallway near the water fountain. I read the text and put my phone in my pocket and walked into my classroom and closed the door and stood still for exactly 30 seconds. Then I picked up the chalk and wrote the day's discussion question on the board. What does it cost a person to tell the truth? Daniel called 4 times between 10 and noon. I did not answer. He called again at 12:30 and this time left a voicemail. His voice was controlled, tightly, effortfully controlled. But underneath it was something unraveling. He said he didn't understand, that we needed to talk, that this was clearly a misunderstanding, that he loved me and the kids, and would I please call him back. I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to Patricia. He came home that evening earlier than he ever came home. I was in the kitchen making pasta when I heard his key in the lock, and I turned around and looked at him and felt, With something like clinical detachment, how young he suddenly looked. How frightened. Fear makes people look young, strips away the performed confidence, the corporate posture. He stood in the doorway of our kitchen, and he was, in that moment, just a man who had been caught. Rachel, he said. Not a question. A name he was finally speaking out loud in this house. Among other things, I said, and turned back to the stove. What followed was not a conversation. It was a performance. His, not mine. He went through all the stages with remarkable efficiency. Denial, partial admission, minimization, then, when I remained unmoved, something that turned ugly. He said the marriage had been cold for years. He said he had needs that weren't being met. He said I had chosen my students, my lesson plans, my kids' schedules over him for a decade. I let him finish. Then I said, "My attorney's name is Patricia Hale. All further communication should go through her office." He stared at me for a long moment. Then his phone rang. He looked at it and left the room to answer it. The call lasted 6 minutes. When he came back, something had changed in his posture. He was steadier, colder. He had spoken to someone who had told him to regroup. 2 days later, I found out who. Rachel Fortin called my personal cell phone on a Sunday morning. I don't know how she got the number. I answered because I didn't recognize it. "I think we should meet," she said. Her voice was calm, smooth, professionally modulated. "There are things you don't understand about the situation, about me and Daniel, about what we have." "I understand quite enough," I said. "He told me you found the phone." A pause. "He also told me that if you press forward with certain financial claims, he'll be forced to dispute your fitness as a primary parent. He has documentation suggesting—" I hung up. My hands, this time, were not still. I stood in my kitchen and I shook. Not from fear, but from the particular physical response the body has to being threatened. But shaking is not falling, and I was not falling. I called Patricia immediately and reported every word. She made a sound that suggested this was not the first time she had heard this kind of play. "It's a bluff," she said, "a standard one, but we'll document it." "Can she be considered a party to the financial misconduct?" I asked. A pause. "We'll look at that," Patricia said. "There may be grounds." That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat on the back porch and looked at the yard I had planted, the garden I had tended, the yard where Owen had learned to ride a bike and where we had held Mia's 9th birthday party, and I let myself be tired. Not defeated, just tired. I took 5 days. I did nothing aggressive, nothing strategic. I went to school and taught my classes and fed my children and called my sister in Portland and finally told her everything, and she listened without interrupting, which is the most generous thing a person can do. I slept. I ate. I let the fear metabolize into something more useful. On the 6th day, Daniel sent flowers. Not cheap flowers. Not a gas station apology bouquet. He sent 24 white peonies from a florist in the city, the kind I had once mentioned years ago that I loved. He remembered. Or Rachel had coached him. I couldn't be sure which was more insulting. The card read, "Can we please talk? Just us, for the kids." No punctuation on the question, just a statement trying to dress itself as a request. I put the flowers in a vase because Mia liked flowers, and Mia didn't need to see her mother throw a bouquet in the trash. But I didn't call him. 2 days later, his mother called. I had anticipated this. Sandra Cahill was a woman of 71 who had grown up in a world where marriages were preserved through silence and endurance, and she loved her son with the focused devotion of someone who had decided very early that he could do no real wrong. She called my cell at 7 p.m. while I was helping Owen with a book report, and I let it go to voicemail. Her message was warm and carefully worded, and underneath its warmth was the implication that I was being hasty, emotional, that whatever had happened between Daniel and me was the ordinary difficulty of a long marriage, and that the children, she emphasized the children, would suffer. I listened to it once. I did not return the call. What his mother and Daniel and Rachel Fortin did not understand, could not understand because they were operating from a script that assumed I was afraid, was that I had moved past fear, not through bravery exactly, through information. I knew what I had. I knew what Patricia had. I knew what Marcus had documented. I understood, with the clarity of someone who has stopped lying to themselves, that I held most of the leverage in this situation. And leverage, when you are calm enough to hold it steadily, is power. Daniel arranged for a friend to reach out, a mutual one, a man named Greg who had been at our wedding and who I had always liked, who I suspected had been dispatched as a human olive branch. Greg texted and asked if I wanted to grab coffee, just to catch up. No agenda. I knew there was an agenda. I texted back that I was busy and wished him well. I was not without support. My sister Lauren drove out from Portland and stayed for 10 days, sleeping in the guest room and taking Owen to school in the mornings, so I could have an extra hour of stillness before the day began. She did not offer advice unless I asked for it. She cooked, badly but enthusiastically. She made me laugh twice, which I had not expected to be capable of. My colleague at school, a woman named Diane who had been through her own divorce 8 years prior, took me for a walk along the DuPage River Trail on a Saturday and told me, very plainly, the 3 things she wished someone had told her. Get a good accountant, protect your credit, and do not negotiate from a place of guilt. I took all 3 pieces of advice. I also found a therapist. Her name was Dr. Anita Rourke, and her office was in a brick building in Wheaton with a waiting room that smelled like cedar and old books. Our first session, I sat across from her, and she asked me how I was doing, and I said, honestly, I feel like someone I trusted handed me a map and I followed it for 14 years and then discovered the map was made up. She said, and now you're making your own. She was right. That was exactly what I was doing. Daniel and Rachel, I later learned, had spent those quiet weeks watching, waiting to see if I would soften, waiting for the grief to overtake the strategy. They were operating on an assumption about who I was. The woman who organized the block party, the woman who refilled the water glass, the woman who was capable of love but perhaps not of this. They were wrong about me. They had always been wrong about me. They came on a Thursday evening in September. I say they because Daniel did not come alone. He arrived at the house, my house, the house where my children were doing homework upstairs, at 6:45 in the evening without calling first. He used his key, which he still technically had. I heard the door, and I came out of the kitchen to find Daniel standing in the front hallway with Rachel Fortin beside him. She was tall, well-dressed, with the kind of carefully assembled composure that takes years to develop. She was wearing a gray linen blazer and holding a small bag, and she looked around my front hallway with an expression I can only describe as the look of someone who has been imagining a place for a long time and is now cataloging the reality of it against the image. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Daniel said, I know this isn't how you'd want this, but Rachel and I thought, we all need to be able to talk like adults. I looked at Rachel. Rachel looked at me. You need to leave, I said. Calm. Even. The way you speak to people who are testing whether you'll raise your voice. Sarah. Daniel's voice was careful, negotiated, the voice of a man who's been coached. We're not here to fight. We're here because we care about Mia and Owen. We want to find something that works for everyone. There it was, the children, invoked as a shield. Rachel spoke then, for the first time. Her voice was everything her phone call had been, smooth, deliberate, calibrated. "I know this is painful," she said. "I can only imagine. But Daniel loves his children, and I'm going to be part of their lives going forward. It would be better for everyone, especially for the kids, if we could establish some kind of respectful communication. We're not asking you to be friends." She paused. "We're asking you to be reasonable." Reasonable. The word people use when they want you to surrender and call it maturity. I looked at her for a long moment. She had spent 12 years inside my marriage. She had received money that my husband had diverted from our shared financial life. She had taken phone calls and weekend trips and a lease on a silver BMW. She had been, for 12 years, a secret. And now she was standing in my hallway telling me to be reasonable. "I would like both of you to leave," I said. "If you use that key again without notice, I will change the locks tonight, and I will notify my attorney that you entered the property. All communication goes through Patricia Hale. You know that." Daniel's composure slipped then. Just briefly, just a flash. "Sarah, if you keep pushing on the financials, this gets ugly. I'm telling you that. There are things I can bring up in court that—" "Are you threatening me in front of a witness?" I asked. He stopped. I had said it quietly, almost pleasantly, but I had said it. Silence. Rachel touched his arm. He closed his mouth, and something happened to her face then. The composure didn't break exactly, but it thinned. She'd come here thinking she would see a woman who was grieving and therefore manageable. She had not seen that. She had seen something she had not anticipated, a woman who had done her homework. They left. I stood in the hallway after the door closed, and I felt it. Yes, I felt afraid. Not the vague, ambient fear of the past months, but a sharp, specific fear. Daniel knew things about my life, my habits, my vulnerabilities. He had 14 years of material. Rachel was clearly not a passive participant. She was strategic, and she was invested, and she had been by his side long enough to have her own intelligence about how to fight. But the fear was not the end of the feeling. It was the beginning of it. Because underneath the fear, or perhaps because of it, something in me went absolutely resolute. Not angry. I was past anger. Resolved. The kind of resolve that comes from understanding that the only thing that protects you is the thing you are already doing. I went upstairs and checked on the kids. Owen was asleep. Mia was reading. I kissed them both, and then I went into my room and I called Patricia and told her everything. The entrance, the words, the threat. I told her I wanted it documented. "It is documented," she said. "The moment you told me." "Good," I said, "because I want this done." The hearing was scheduled for the 3rd week of October. In Illinois, divorce proceedings are not always dramatic. They are, more often, procedural. Rows of numbers, legal language, a judge who has seen everything and responds to nothing with visible emotion. Patricia had explained this to me months before, and I had understood it intellectually. But understanding something intellectually and living through it in a wood-paneled courtroom are two different experiences. Daniel came with his attorney, a man named Jeffrey Marsh, who had a reputation for aggressive tactics and a bespoke suit. Rachel was not present in the courtroom. She had no legal standing to be there. But I knew she was close. I had seen a silver BMW in the parking structure 2 levels down, and I had made a note of it and kept walking. The fact that she had come at all told me something useful. She was afraid of what was about to happen inside that room. Fear brings people to parking structures. Confidence stays home. Daniel looked good. He had dressed carefully, the kind of careful that is itself a message. He had lost a bit of the fear I had seen in the kitchen, replaced it with a reconstructed version of his professional self. He sat beside Jeffrey Marsh, and he did not look at me. The first hour was financial. Patricia presented our documentation, the discovered accounts, the estimated diversions, the 6-year pattern Marcus and the accountant had reconstructed with forensic precision. The numbers were specific and sourced and impossible to dismiss. Daniel's attorney objected to several exhibits. The judge overruled most of them. Then Jeffrey Marsh began his counter-presentation. He argued that the business account in question was legitimately structured, that the expenditures were business-related, that documentation supporting this would be forthcoming. He used the word forthcoming 3 times, and each time the judge's expression remained exactly the same, unmoved. He then pivoted, as Patricia had predicted he would, to the question of custodial fitness. He suggested that my work schedule, my long school hours, and what he called a pattern of emotional unavailability in the marriage had contributed to the breakdown of the family structure. He used soft language, careful, coded, but the implication was clear. It was the moment I had been prepared for. Patricia stood and submitted the documentation we had gathered over 4 months. School records showing my consistent involvement in both children's education, my presence at every medical appointment logged in their pediatrician's files, testimonials from teachers and coaches and the soccer league coordinator, a structured timeline of my documented contributions to the household over 14 years, set against Daniel's actual logged presence. She presented the voicemail he had left the morning after service, the one where his voice had slipped, and 2 text messages in which he had referenced the children as leverage. She presented a record of Rachel Fortin's phone call to my personal number, including the verbatim threat regarding custody. And then she presented something I had not known was coming. Marcus Webb, it turned out, had done more than document meetings in Lincoln Park. He had, legally, through public financial records and a source inside the leasing company who had chosen to cooperate, traced a second account. Not the shell account we already knew about, a different one. An account connected to Rachel Fortin's studio, in which Daniel had made 47 deposits over 5 years, totaling just over $200,000. He had been funding her business with money from our marriage. The courtroom did not gasp. Courtrooms rarely do. But there was a quality of stillness that settled over the room in the seconds after Patricia laid that exhibit on the table. The particular stillness of people absorbing something that changes the shape of what they thought they understood. I felt it. The court reporter felt it. Even the bailiff near the door seemed to pause for just a fraction of a second. Only the judge maintained his expression of deliberate neutrality, because that is what judges are trained to do. But he read the document carefully, and he read it twice. When Patricia laid that exhibit on the table, I watched Jeffrey Marsh lean toward Daniel and whisper something. Daniel's jaw tightened. It was a small movement, but I saw it. 14 years of watching a face. You learn its involuntary language. The judge reviewed the document and asked Daniel's attorney to respond. What followed was not pretty. Jeffrey Marsh was skilled, but skill is not the same as material, and his material was inadequate. He attempted to characterize the transfers as personal loans. The judge asked for the loan documentation. There was no loan documentation. He suggested the transfers were gifts. a characterization that created its own legal problem. The judge made a note. Daniel was asked to speak directly on 2 points. He answered both with the particular cadence of a man who had run out of narrative and was now improvising, sentence by sentence, hoping the next one would hold. It didn't hold. By the time the morning session ended, Jeffrey Marsh had requested a 30-minute recess, and Daniel had aged, visibly, a decade. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Patricia, and I did not feel triumphant. I felt, more than anything, tired in a deep and honest way. The tiredness of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a long time and can see, for the first time, where they will be able to put it down. I thought about the woman who had stood in a June driveway with a prepaid phone in her hand, who had chosen stillness over reaction. That woman had built this moment, quietly, over months, without anyone seeing her do it. And now, here it was. When the recess ended, Jeffrey Marsh made a statement. The language was legal and careful and amounted in plain English to this: Daniel Cahill was prepared to discuss a settlement. Patricia leaned to my ear. "Your call," she said. I thought about the peonies on my counter, the flowers in front of my face, the woman in my hallway telling me to be reasonable. "No settlement," I said. "We finish it." The settlement Daniel's team had proposed would have given me the house, basic child support, and a split of the visible marital assets. A clean and, on the surface, reasonable-looking arrangement that would have left the $540,000 in diverted funds essentially unaddressed, and Rachel Fortin's BMW and studio startup capital comfortably intact. Patricia had explained the offer to me the evening before the second hearing day, sitting across my kitchen table with a legal pad and 2 cups of coffee. She laid it out clearly, and then she said, "The judge has seen the financials. If we go back in, there's a real possibility the court treats the diversions as dissipation of marital assets, which changes the math significantly." "What's the risk?" I asked. "Litigation is always a risk," she said, "but our documentation is solid." I thought about Marcus Webb sitting in his car across from a restaurant in River North, doing his job while I was teaching The Great Gatsby to juniors who didn't yet know that green lights are dangerous things to chase. I thought about the library on Benton Avenue and the email account and the 4 months of work, mine and Patricia's and Marcus's and the accountant's, that had gone into this. I thought about Owen's math homework and Mia's history essay, and every ordinary evening I had held together with both hands while simultaneously building a case that could withstand a courtroom. All of that work, all of those careful, invisible hours. "Let's go back in," I said. The second day in court was shorter than the first. Patricia presented a focused, methodical argument to the judge regarding the dissipation of marital assets under Illinois statute. The $540,000 was documented. The timeline was established. The connection to a third party, Rachel Fortin, was evidenced. Jeffrey Marsh, to his credit, fought. But he was fighting with a hand he hadn't fully believed was as weak as it was. And the moment the judge began asking pointed questions about the second account, the room shifted. The shift was not visible in the furniture or the fluorescent lights or the court reporter's steady typing. It was visible in Daniel's posture, in the particular collapse of a man who has, for the first time, run out of options and knows it. I had seen that posture once before, on the evening he came home to find me unmoved in the kitchen. But this time there was no door to walk through, no phone to answer, no room to leave. He was in a courtroom, and the record was being made, and there was nowhere to go. The judgment came 3 weeks later. I will not pretend it was everything I might have wished for in a different version of my life. No court judgment is a substitute for 16 years you cannot get back, but it was, on every material measure, a victory. The marital home was awarded to me outright. Mortgage liability included but offset by an equitable adjustment. I was designated primary residential parent for Mia and Owen, with Daniel retaining standard visitation. Child support was calculated at a figure that reflected his actual income, including the forensic accountant's revised estimate of company revenue he had previously understated. The $540,000 in diverted assets was treated by the court as dissipation, which adjusted the asset division significantly in my favor. I received a lump sum judgment that, together with the equitable property split, gave me a financial foundation I had not expected to have. Daniel was ordered to pay a portion of my legal fees, which the judge cited as appropriate given the financial conduct the case had documented. Jeffrey Marsh filed a notice of intent to appeal. 14 days later, he withdrew it. I was told, secondhand through Patricia, that Daniel had made the decision himself, that continuing to fight would cost more, financially and reputationally, than accepting the outcome. It was, in the end, the most rational decision he had made in years. I almost respected him for it. Almost. I was in my car in the school parking lot when Patricia called to tell me about the withdrawal. The same lot where I had opened Marcus Webb's folder on a morning that felt like a different lifetime. The same engine running, the same air conditioning blowing against my face, the same parking spaces, the same view of the school's brick exterior, the same ordinary world that had continued turning through all of it. Through every document and every hearing and every night I had lain awake making sure I hadn't missed anything. "It's done," Patricia said. I said, "Thank you, Patricia." I sat there for a few minutes. The engine ran. The air conditioning blew. Outside, a group of students crossed the parking lot laughing about something I couldn't hear. Life continuing. Mine continuing. But finally, unambiguously, on my own terms. I put the car in drive and I went home to my children. The first thing I did after the judgment was final was have the locks changed. Not as a dramatic gesture. Daniel had stopped coming by months ago, but because I wanted that to be the first concrete act of the new chapter. A locksmith named Ben came on a Tuesday afternoon and worked for 40 minutes while I watched, and when he handed me 2 new keys, I held them in my palm for a moment longer than necessary. My house, my keys, my life. The second thing I did was repaint the bedroom. I had always wanted it a deep shade of blue. Daniel had found the idea too dark, and I chose a color called Hail Navy and painted it myself over a long weekend in November, while Mia and Owen visited Daniel per the custody schedule. I put on a playlist I'd been building for months, and I painted and I listened to music, and I was, in those hours, more peaceful than I had been in years. It was a small act, choosing that color, but there is something profound about reclaiming even the smallest decisions. The color of the walls you wake up to, the arrangement of furniture nobody else gets to veto. I had forgotten how good it felt to simply choose. And in that forgetting, I realized how much of myself I had quietly surrendered over 14 years. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in the small daily compressions that accumulate into a shape you no longer recognize as your own. Painting those walls was the beginning of recognizing myself again. I went back to teaching that fall with a quality of presence I hadn't had in a long time. My students noticed, though of course they wouldn't have been able to name what had changed. I was more precise, more patient, more genuinely interested in what they had to say. Diane, my colleague, told me at the holiday party in December that I seemed like someone who had gotten enough sleep. "More than that," I said, and she laughed, and she understood. Lauren came back for Christmas with her husband and their youngest child, and we cooked together in that newly painted house, and Mia and Owen ran between rooms, and there was chaos and laughter and the particular warmth of a home that is held together by the people who actually want to be in it. I looked around the table at dinner, at my sister, her family, my children, and I felt something settle in me that I can only describe as rightness, the feeling of a life returning to its actual shape, not a rebuilt version of what I had lost, but something genuinely new, something that belonged entirely to me and to the people who had chosen to stand beside me when it mattered most. Lauren caught my eye across the table at one point and raised her glass slightly, just barely in the smallest possible toast. No words. She didn't need any. Two sisters who had known each other for 40 years understood in that moment exactly what was being celebrated. I started running. 3 mornings a week along the DuPage River Trail where Diane and I had walked months before. At first, I was slow and graceless, but by March, I could run 4 miles without stopping, and I had learned that there is something about physical effort, about asking your body to do something and having it comply, that is quietly restorative in ways that are difficult to articulate. Some mornings, the trail was empty and the river was silver, and the only sound was my own breathing. And in those moments, I understood, fully and without sentimentality, that I had come through something. Not unscathed. No one comes through something like this unscathed, but intact. More than intact. There were mornings when I ran and thought about nothing at all, which sounds unremarkable until you understand that for 2 years, my mind had never been quiet, had never stopped cataloging and planning and bracing. Silence in your own head, it turns out, is one of the finest things you can earn back. In the spring, Owen's teacher nominated me to speak at a district fundraiser about literacy education. I said yes. Standing at the podium in front of 300 people, I thought about the woman who had not raised her voice in a driveway or a kitchen or a courtroom. And I thought that perhaps that particular kind of restraint, that sustained, deliberate calm, was something worth teaching, worth passing on. Not because silence is always the answer, but because knowing when to be quiet, when to listen, when to observe, when to wait, is one of the most underestimated forms of intelligence there is. By summer, I was seeing someone. I didn't plan it. I wasn't looking. His name was James, and he was a pediatric physical therapist I had met through Mia's soccer league. He'd been working with a girl on the team who had a knee injury. He was quiet and funny, and he had, I noticed early, the habit of listening completely rather than simply waiting for his turn to speak. We went to dinner twice before either of us called it a date. On our third dinner, he asked me what the last 2 years had taught me. I thought about it for a moment. That I'm more capable than I gave myself credit for, I said. He nodded, as though that was the answer he had expected. And then he said, quietly, I think most people are. They just don't get the chance to find out. I looked at him across the table and thought, here is a man who understands something true. It was a good feeling, a new one, the kind you don't rush. As for Daniel and Rachel Fortin, the appeal withdrawal had not ended Daniel's legal complications. The forensic accountant's findings had been documented with a level of specificity that attracted, in the months following the judgment, the attention of the IRS. I had no involvement in what followed. I simply knew, through Patricia, that an inquiry had been opened regarding the company accounts. Daniel's business, which had been valued at several $1,000,000 at the time of our divorce, entered a complicated period. 2 major clients withdrew contracts during the investigation. A partner bought out a stake at a reduced valuation. By the end of the following year, the company Daniel's father had built had been significantly diminished, not destroyed, but diminished in ways that were permanent. He moved into an apartment in the city. I know because Mia mentioned it on the phone. She was measured about her father. I was careful, always, never to say anything that would put her in the middle. That was a discipline I had chosen early and maintained. Whatever he had done to me, he was still their father, and children are not weapons. Rachel Fortin's interior design studio closed 18 months after the divorce was finalized. The reasons weren't public, but the timing correlated with the financial investigation and, I was told by someone mutual, with the withdrawal of a significant ongoing client that had been connected to Daniel's company. She sublet the Lincoln Park space. I don't know where she went after that, and I found to my own surprise that I didn't much care. She'd occupied a very large portion of my mind for 2 years, and then, when the legal chapter closed, she simply receded. Not because I forgave her exactly, but because she stopped being relevant to the life I was building. The life I was building had no room for her in it. When I think about that Saturday morning in June, the garbage bag, the driveway, the leather case under the passenger seat, I think about what it cost me to stay still when every nerve in my body wanted to react. That stillness was the most important thing I did, not the lawyer, not the investigator, not the 4 months of documents and the courtroom and the judgment. The stillness came first, the decision to know before I acted, to understand before I spoke. That was the foundation everything else was built on. Here's what I learned. Love is not a reason to stop knowing yourself, and a life built on someone else's lies is not a life you owe loyalty to. If you are watching this and you recognize something in this story, a phone turned face down, a laugh that stopped